All right, so you've given us quite a lot to dig into this time around.
You weren't kidding.
Yeah, looks like we've got CFR titles, we've got expert discussions on YouTube, we've got looks at industry best practices, so pretty wide range.
It is. It is.
And it's all centered around this idea of stability programs and how we actually determine the shelf life of, well, really anything, right?
Yeah.
Medicines, supplements. I mean, it seems simple enough when you see that date on a label, but I think we both know there's a whole lot more behind that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that little date, it's like the tip of the iceberg, right? Underneath, you've got this huge amount of science, a ton of regulatory oversight, and all of that is going into making sure that whatever you're taking, whether it's a prescription or something you picked up at the store, that it's actually going to be safe and do what it's supposed to do all the way up to that date.
Right, it's not just some arbitrary number they slap on there.
Nope, not at all.
So I'm thinking for this deep dive, we need to really break down this whole process. We'll take all these different sources, the GMP training materials, those dense CFR titles, even those kind of behind-the-scenes glimpses into how the FDA thinks about this stuff.
Yeah.
We'll try to make sense of it all.
Yeah, it can feel like a really tangled web, all these rules and the science behind them, but I think if we untangle it together, piece by piece,
Yeah.
we can get to a point where it really clicks for everyone listening. Like, aha, that's why this matters, and why maybe they should care about what's going on behind the scenes.
Totally, totally. So let's start with, I guess, one of the real foundational things here, which is good manufacturing practices.
GMP, yeah.
GMP. This pops up over and over again in these sources. I mean, from compact regs, which, cover food and supplements,
Right.
to like actual GMP training materials that people are going through. So it seems like these stability programs are really deeply tied to this whole idea of GMP.
Oh, 100%. You can really think of GMP, and this is spelled out in detail in those compact regs. You mentioned parts 110 and 111,
Yep.
and then also in 21 CFR part 211, which is like the big one for pharmaceuticals. Think of GMP as like the bedrock. It's the core promise of quality,
Yeah.
Whether you're manufacturing a drug or a dietary supplement, GMP is saying, this is how we guarantee that what we're making is consistently good. And then stability programs, they're like the scientific proof that backs up that promise over time. So yeah, they're very closely linked.
Okay, so stability testing, it's kind of like the proof in the pudding, right? It's showing that you're actually walking the walk when it comes to this GMP stuff.
Exactly, exactly. It's the evidence that a product is actually maintaining all those qualities that it's supposed to have, not just when it's made, but all the way through to when someone actually uses it.
And you highlighted 21 CFR Part 211 specifically. It's some of the GMP training stuff you said. That one's all about production and process controls, right?
Yeah.
It seems particularly relevant to like how we actually maintain stability over time.
It is. It really sets a high bar. If you look at it, especially subpart F, which is all about production controls, it's like they're saying, okay, you need to have everything documented down to the last detail. Your procedures, your processes, everything's got to be validated, proven to work. You need meticulous records of every batch you make. It's very thorough.
Sounds intense.
It is, but stability studies fit right into that, right? Because
Yeah.
they're what give you the data to prove that your manufacturing process is consistent and it's producing a quality product every single time, all the way through the product's life. If, for example, you run a stability study and the product starts degrading way too fast, well, that's a sign that something's wrong with your production process and you need to go back and fix it under these GMP regulations.
So like it's all connected. You can't just say you're following GMP. You have to actually prove it with these stability studies.
Right, exactly. It's not just checking a box. It's about having the data to back it up.
And of course, the big watchdog in all of this is the FDA. We even have some transcripts in this whole set of sources from the FDA Clinical Investigator Training course.
Oh, yeah, those are interesting.
They are. What do those tell us about how the FDA views these stability programs, like when they're going in and doing inspections?
I think the big takeaway from those transcripts is how much emphasis they put on data reliability. When FDA investigators come knocking, they're not messing around. They want to see cold, hard evidence that a company is actually doing what they're supposed to be doing to guarantee the quality of their products.
Right.
Stability data is a big part of that evidence. It's like if the FDA finds problems with how a company is running their stability studies, if the design is bad, if the documentation is shoddy, or if anything seems fishy, it's a red flag, it makes them question the whole product.
So it's not just about like ticking boxes for the FDA either. They really want to see that these stability programs are done right.
Absolutely, and it's for good reason, right? If there are issues with a company's stability program, it means you, the consumer, can't really trust that the product is going to be safe and effective. It undermines the whole system.
It makes sense. Now, looking through all these materials, it's kind of amazing how many different parts of the CFR are mentioned. We've got Part 11, which is all about electronic records and making sure they're trustworthy.
Super important for stability studies.
Right. You need to know those records haven't been tampered with, that you can trace everything back. Then there's Parts 110 and 111, which cover food and supplements specifically.
Yeah.
But then we also have sections about radiopharmaceuticals, compounding, new drugs, even medical devices. It's like this whole regulatory universe.
And the thing is, if you zoom out a bit, you start to see this common thread. It's this focus on quality and managing a product through its whole life cycle, from the moment it's being developed to when it's sitting on a shelf somewhere waiting to be used. So while each section of the CFR is tailored to the specific type of product, the underlying principle is the same. You, as the manufacturer, need to show that you're in control, that you understand how your product behaves over time, and that you can guarantee its quality every step of the way. Stability programs are a big part of how you demonstrate that. They provide that link between the regulations and the actual behavior of the product in the real world.
So, in a way, stability testing is kind of like the glue that holds a lot of this regulatory stuff together.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's like the common denominator that helps ensure that whether you're making a pill or a protein bar, the same high standards of quality are being applied.
Makes sense. Now, we've got one more transcript to look at, the one on the YouTube. 21 CFR 111 GMP laboratory overview.
Right.
And that one really emphasizes how interconnected all these regulations are, especially bringing up Subpart J, which covers laboratory operations, in relation to all these other GMP requirements.
Yeah, subpart J is really important. It's all about like the nuts and bolts of how your lab actually operates.
Yeah.
So, are you following proper testing procedures? Is your documentation up to snuff? All that good stuff. And the transcript makes it clear that this isn't some separate thing. It's woven into all the other parts of the regulation. Because think about it, stability testing happens in a lab, right?
Right.
So you have to follow subpart J to make sure your data is reliable. But then that data feeds back into proving that you're meeting all the other GMP requirements about how you make the product, how you control quality overall. It's all one big system.
So it's not just about, like, passing a lab inspection. It's about how those lab results then tie back into the bigger picture of GMP, making sure your whole operation is up to par.
Exactly, exactly. It's all interconnected. You can't really separate one part from the other.
Okay, so we've talked about the who, the FDA, the manufacturers, the what, the GMPs, the specific regulations. But let's talk about the why. Why are these stability studies so essential in the first place? Like, beyond just checking boxes for the FDA, what's the real core reason we do all this?
Yeah, I think it comes down to two really big things, and this is what matters most for anyone who's actually using these products.
Okay.
Safety and efficacy.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that over time, that product sitting on the shelf or in your medicine cabinet isn't going to become dangerous, right? Like it doesn't break down into something harmful, it doesn't get contaminated with bacteria or something. That's safety. And then efficacy, that means it's still going to do what it's supposed to do. If it's a medication, it'll still be effective in treating whatever it's for. If it's a supplement, it'll still deliver the nutrients it claims to have. And all of that needs to hold true throughout the entire shelf life.
So stability testing is really about guaranteeing that a product is going to be both safe and effective for as long as it's supposed to be.
Right, up to that expiration date. And that's why it's so crucial.
Yeah. There's this ICH guideline that keeps popping up, Q1A R2.
Yeah.
That's from the International Council for Harmonization.
Yeah.
And it's specifically about stability testing for new drug products, right?
That's right. It's a big one. And what's important about ICH guidelines is they're not just one country's rules. They're kind of like a global agreement on best practices. So Q1A R2, it's like a blueprint for stability testing of new drugs, substances, and products.
Okay.
It spells out what tests you need to do, under what specific conditions, for how long, all that stuff. And it's all about getting the data you need to be confident in setting a shelf life for a product.
So the common language for everyone around the world who's involved in developing and regulating these products.
Exactly. It helps ensure that everyone's on the same page when it comes to stability testing, which is crucial for making sure medicines are safe and effective no matter where they're made or sold.
Now, there's another term that comes up in these materials, quality by design, or QBD.
Yes, QBD, very important concept.
It's mentioned in ICH Q8 R1 and some other related guidelines. and in the Handbook of Analytical Quality by Design. So how does this QBD approach tie into the idea of stability?
So QBD is all about being proactive. It's about building quality into a product right from the start, rather than just testing it at the end and hoping for the best.
So rather than just like checking for problems after the fact, you're trying to prevent them in the first place.
Exactly. And part of that is understanding everything that might affect a product's stability, like what happens if it's exposed to heat or light or moisture? How does the formulation change over time? And then you use that knowledge to design a product and a manufacturing process that's going to be inherently more stable.
Okay.
So stability studies, they become a way to confirm that your QBD strategy is working. You've designed this super stable product, and then the studies prove it.
So QBD is like setting the stage for a long and stable shelf life, and then the actual stability studies are the evidence that it's all working as planned.
Exactly.
All right, so we've got a good handle on the why, the who, and the what, but now let's get into the how. How do you actually design and run these stability studies to figure out how long a product's going to last?
All right, so when you're designing a stability study, you've got to think about a lot of things. First, what conditions are you going to test under?
Okay.
And this is where you really have to think about real-world scenarios, like how is this product going to be stored? What temperatures might it be exposed to? Humidity, light. You've got to try to mimic those conditions in your study.
So depending on the product, you might need to run tests under very different conditions, right? Like something that needs to be refrigerated is going to have a different set of tests than something that's stored at room temperature.
Exactly. You want to make sure you're stressing the product in a way that's relevant to how it's actually going to be used and stored. And there's this ICH guideline, Q1B, that's all about photostability testing. That's looking at how light affects a product. So if you've got something that's sensitive to light, you need to take that into account when you're designing your stability study. You don't want to just test it in the dark and then find out it degrades rapidly on a sunny shelf, right?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, once you've got your conditions figured out, what's next?
Then you need to decide what you're actually going to test, right? Like,
Okay.
what specific attributes of the product are you going to measure? Are you looking at potency? Like, how much of the active ingredient is still there?
Yeah.
Are you looking at purity? Are there any impurities forming over time? What about the physical appearance? Like, is it changing color or getting chunky? You have to choose what's important for that specific product and then figure out when you're going to take samples to measure those things. Like, are you going to check every month, every 3 months, every year? It depends on the product and the expected shelf life.
So it's like having a schedule for checking in on the product and seeing how it's holding up over time.
Exactly. You want to have enough data points to really understand how it's changing.
And we have a couple of sources that really emphasize the importance of using scientifically valid test methods for all of this.
Oh, yeah, that's crucial.
There's the YouTube transcript on 21 CFR 111 and also CFR 212.50C. They both talk about this.
Right. And it makes sense, right? The methods you use to test your product, they have to be reliable. Like, they have to be sensitive enough to pick up on even small changes, but also specific, meaning they're only measuring what you want them to measure.
Okay.
And they have to be accurate and reproducible, so you know that if you run the same test twice, you're going to get the same results. You can't base a shelf life on data from a test that's all over the place, right?
Right. It'd be like trying to measure something with a ruler that keeps changing lengths.
Yeah.
You're never going to get a reliable measurement.
Exactly. So yeah, validated methods, that's the key.
Yeah.
And CFR 212 lays it out pretty clearly. You got to have the right tools for the job if you want reliable data.
And it's not enough to just have a test method. You have to prove that it works, right?
Yeah.
This is where method validation comes in.
Yeah, method validation.
That was mentioned in that YouTube transcript too.
Yeah.
And there's also an ICH guideline, Q2R1, which seems to be the go-to for this.
Yeah, Q2R1, it's like the Bible of method validation.
So what does it actually mean to validate a test method?
So basically, you're putting your method through its paces. You're running a bunch of tests to prove that it's doing what it's supposed to do consistently and reliably.
Okay.
Like, you're looking at its accuracy, precision, specificity, how low can it detect something, all those important parameters. And you're documenting everything, so you have proof that your method is fit for purpose.
So before you even start your stability study, you have to make sure your tools are sharp.
Exactly. You've got to have confidence in the data that you're generating, or the whole thing falls apart.
All right, so you've designed your study, you've validated your methods, you've run your tests, you've got all this data about how your product is changing over time.
Yeah.
How do you then take all that information and actually determine the shelf life?
So this is where the data analysis comes in.
Okay.
You've got all these data points, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at them seeing, okay, is the active ingredient decreasing over time? Are impurities increasing? You're looking for trends. And then you use statistics, fancy math, to analyze those trends and make predictions.
Okay.
Like, if we keep seeing this rate of degradation, when is this product going to fall outside of the acceptable range?
Yeah.
And that's basically how you determine the shelf life. It's the time period where you can confidently say, based on the data, that the product is going to stay within those predefined specifications.
So it's not just about like picking a date out of thin air.
Yeah.
There's a whole scientific process behind it.
Right. It's all driven by the data. And those specifications, they're not arbitrary either. They're set based on what's safe and effective for that particular product.
Now, the YouTube transcript also stressed the importance of having these detailed stability study protocols.
Oh, yeah. Protocols are essential.
So these are like pre-approved plans that lay out exactly how the whole study is going to be conducted.
Exactly. The protocol is like a roadmap. It tells you everything you need to know about the study. What product are you testing? What conditions? What time points are you sampling? What tests are you running? What are your acceptance criteria? It's all in there, every little detail.
Okay.
And that's important because you want to make sure the study is done consistently in a way that's scientifically sound. If everyone's just winging it, you're not going to get reliable results.
So it's about making sure everyone's following the same playbook, so to speak.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, so we've walked through design, execution, data analysis, the whole shebang. What would you say are the key takeaways here? Like, what are the truly essential elements of a strong stability program?
All right. So if we're talking key elements, first and foremost, you got to be following the rules.
Okay.
Regulatory compliance, that's non-negotiable. You've got all these regulations like 21 CFR Parts 210 and 211 for pharmaceuticals, Part 111 for supplements, and they're not suggestions. They're the law. So you got to know those regulations inside and out and make sure your stability program is ticking all the boxes.
Right.
And as we've talked about, method validation, super important. You got to have the right tools and know how to use them. And, one thing we touched on briefly but haven't really dug into is ongoing monitoring.
Okay. Yeah, that came up a couple of times in the materials. So does that mean stability testing doesn't just happen during the initial development of a product? Like, does it continue after the product's already on the market?
It does. It does. I mean, ideally, you've designed a great product, you've done your due diligence with the stability studies, you've got a solid shelf life established. But the real world is messy, right?
Right.
Products get shipped, stored in different conditions, maybe exposed to heat or light. Things happen. So ongoing stability testing, it's kind of like a safety net.
Yeah.
You're keeping an eye on your product even after it's out in the world, making sure it's still holding up, still safe and effective.
So it's like continuous quality control
Yeah.
even after the product has left the factory.
Exactly, exactly. You want to make sure that that expiration date you've set, it actually means something.
Now, documentation. This is a big one.
Oh, huge.
It comes up everywhere in these materials, from the GMP training stuff
Right.
to those transcripts on good documentation practices, and even 21 CFR Part 11, which is all about electronic records.
Right, and it all boils down to this. If you didn't document it, it didn't happen.
That's a good way to put it.
Seriously, documentation is everything when it comes to stability programs. You need detailed records of literally everything. Your protocols, your raw data, any deviations from the plan, investigations, the whole 9 yards. And it's got to be accurate, complete, and contemporaneous, meaning you're writing it down as it happens, not trying to reconstruct it later.
So it's not just about, like, having a notebook somewhere. It's about having a system that ensures every step is documented, every decision is traceable.
Right, and that's where 21 CFR Part 11 comes in, right? If you're using electronic systems, which most companies are these days, you got to make sure they're compliant with those regulations, especially Part 1150, which is all about electronic signatures. You need to know that those records are trustworthy, that they haven't been tampered with.
So it's like adding an extra layer of security to ensure that your digital records are just as reliable as paper records used to be.
Exactly, exactly.
And finally, it seems like both the quality control and quality assurance departments play a big role in all of this.
Oh, definitely. They're kind of like the guardians of the stability program.
Okay.
So QC, they're the ones in the trenches, actually doing the testing, following the protocols, generating the data. And then QA, they've got a more bird's eye view.
Okay.
They're making sure the whole program is running smoothly, that it's compliant with all the regulations, that everyone's following the SOPs. And if something goes wrong, like you get an out of specification result on a test,
Yeah.
they're the ones who have to figure out why and what to do about it. That came up in that YouTube transcript from.
I do, yeah. So it's
Yeah.
like a two-pronged approach.
Right.
You've got the people doing the hands-on work,
Yeah.
and then you've got the people making sure that the whole system is working the way it's supposed to.
Exactly. You need both to have a really solid stability program.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've gone from the nitty-gritty of testing methods to the big picture importance of regulatory compliance and continuous monitoring. But I'm curious, how does all this translate into that actual expiration date that we see on a product? Like, how do you take all this data, all these rules, and boil it down to a single date?
So that expiration date or shelf life, it's not just a random number, right? It's based on all that scientific data that's been generated during the stability studies. You're looking at how the product changes over time, and you're setting that date based on when the data shows that the product is no longer going to be safe or effective, or when it falls outside of those predefined specifications we talked about.
So it's like the data tells you how long the product is good for,
Yeah.
and then that gets translated into the expiration date on the label.
Exactly. And, it's not just the manufacturer who decides this.
Okay.
The regulatory authorities, like the FDA, they have to review the data and agree that the proposed shelf life is justified. They're the ones who give the final stamp of approval.
So there's a whole back and forth between the manufacturer and the regulators to make sure that the expiration date is accurate and, safe for the consumer.
Right. It's a collaborative process, and it's all about making sure that the information on that label is trustworthy.
Now, there's one last thing I wanted to touch on. We saw in 21 CFR 211.170 that even after a product is out on the market, manufacturers still have to keep reserve samples from each batch.
Oh, yeah, the reserve samples. Those are important.
So what's the purpose of that?
So think of those reserve samples as a backup plan, a safety net. You've released your product, it's out there being used, but what if something goes wrong?
Okay.
What if there's a complaint or a question about the quality of a particular batch? You need to be able to go back and retest that batch to see if there's a problem. And those reserve samples, they give you a way to do that.
So it's like having a time capsule of each batch, so you can go back and investigate if you need to.
Exactly, exactly. You're preserving a piece of each batch so that you can check it later if necessary. And those samples have to be stored under the same conditions as the marketed product. You can't just stick them in a random closet and hope for the best.
So it's like having a little mini warehouse where you're maintaining a perfect replica of the conditions that the product is actually being stored under out in the real world.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. You want to make sure those samples are representative of what's actually out there being used.
Wow, so this has been a really comprehensive look at stability programs and shelf life determination. It's amazing how much goes into that seemingly simple date printed on a product.
I know, right? It's easy to take it for granted, but there's a whole universe of science and regulation behind it.
It's like what we were saying at the beginning. That date is just the tip of the iceberg. There's this whole massive hidden structure underneath it, all these systems and processes working together to ensure that when you pick up a product, you can trust that it's going to be safe and effective.
And I think that's the key takeaway here. Stability programs, they're not just about paperwork and bureaucracy. They're about protecting public health. They're about making sure that the products we rely on, whether it's medicines, supplements, food, whatever it is, that they're going to do what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it. And that's something we should all care about.
Absolutely. So for you, the listener, as you go about your day, maybe think about this. How do you think technology is going to change the way we do stability testing in the future?
That's a good question.
Right. We're already seeing amazing advancements in areas like data science and artificial intelligence. Could we use those tools to predict shelf life more accurately? Maybe even without having to do as much physical testing.
It's definitely possible.
It's a fascinating thing to think about.
Sure.
And we encourage you to keep learning, keep exploring, look into the regulations we discussed, delve into the science behind all of this. The more you understand, the more informed you'll be as a consumer.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to your health.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
See you then?